Today, we're going to explore card companies, and the first company we're going to speak about is the Flair Company. Now, this is a company with a complex and controversial past that is now out of business or defunct, and they produce cards as early as 1923, then a big pause from 1959 to 1963, and then 1982 to 2007 when it went out of business. I began collecting cards in 1989 and actually stopped collecting in 2007, which was the last year for the Flair baseball cards. The Flair Corporation was actually developed in 1885, but the developer of the first bubblegum, Blibber Blubber, was with Flair in 1912. Now, the family-owned company until 1989, and many individuals owned it since, and one of them was a Marvel Entertainment. You probably know of Marvel Comics, who bought it in 1992. In 1923, the Flair Company decided to add baseball cards, and that the baseball cards first were W515 baseball strip card set, and instead of gum, they used Bob's and Fruit Hearts, candy product, and that soon, in 1928, the gum changed from Blibber Blubber to something that perhaps is more familiar to some people, and that was Double Bubble, developed by Walter Deemer. They also created in this confectionery company of gum, chiclets, which are somewhat known to most people. Then after that set, it didn't appear again in Flair until about 1959, where they created a Ted Williams set. The Ted Williams set was partly due to that they signed Ted Williams to a contract and sold an 80 card set around his career and highlights. Very popular player, very successful, Hall of Famer. Now, the Topps had signed others to exclusive contracts, so that Flair was left with kind of trying to be unique in the business. Williams retired in 1960, only 1 year after the Ted Williams set. But in the Ted Williams set, it was kind of interesting about not only his history, but included other popular players like Babe Ruth, as well as celebrities and other players and people, one of which was Jim Thorpe. Then 1960, Flair produced Baseball Great Series, which is a very interesting set if you kind of like baseball history, and people like baseball normally do. And this card had pictures of those players that were legends, people like Lou Gehrig and Ty Cobb and John McGraw and Ted Williams, Cy Young, Babe Ruth, and that you got the cards that were not probably affordable for the actual cards when they played, but still had a card that was representing these kind of well-known players. And then they redid another set in the following year, 1962, that included, again, these popular players. So they're very kind of unique sets to collect, not very expensive, but kind of great if you kind of like the old players and the legends. Now in 1963, Flair came out with a more current baseball card set that included the current players, and it was Maury Wills that made the set even historical. So the controversy was that Topps didn't produce a Maury Wills card until about 4 years after he entered the league. So he was a rookie, but when they first produced their card, he had been in the league for 4 years. Now, what was the problem that Topps did not get able to sign Wills was that they didn't think he was a valid star, and they failed to recognize him. And because feeling miffed he was not recognized, and Will signed an exclusive contract with Flair and would not have cards made of himself for Topps. But in 1982, Kmart produced a set of MVP players and included Wills. And the card that shows on the card was a never produced 1962 Topps card. And even Topps came out with a turn back the clock later on in a later series of cards that includes the same kind of replica of what it would look like if they did produce a Maury Wills a rookie card. So in 1963, Wills became a real kind of enigma in that he wasn't just some ordinary player. He actually was the most valuable player because of his base stealing skills. And as you see on the back of his 1963 card, he broke the record and held it for a long period of time of 104 stolen bases during the season. Another player that appeared in the Flair set that was a spokesperson unique to the set was a popular player, but not a Hall of Famer, named Jimmy Pearsall. So the 1963 set was remarkable in terms of the history of Maury Wills and the flap between Topps and Flair, but it was also kind of well known because of legal battles that were going on between Flair and Topps. So Flair was producing cards of players that weren't under contract to Flair. And they just threw caution to the wind that they would have to sign contracts in order to get these players to appear on their baseball cards. And they produced this 67-card set featuring some of the biggest names in the game. It was issued again, not with bubble gum, but basically a sherry flavored cookie resembling a dog biscuit, which I've never seen nor tasted, but that's what they were using instead of gum. And the Topps filed a lawsuit against Flair. It stopped Flair cold. So this was the last set they would produce for a little while because Topps still held onto the rights of most players, and the set was not particularly successful. So in other words, the value of the 1963 Flair set is not as lucrative in order for sales and profit as would be the Topps sets of that time. But the Flair, because of this kind of controversy and having to bow down because of the contracts, they sold its remaining player contracts to Topps for a $395,000 in 1966, which would be valued about $3.3 million today. The most valuable 1963 Flair cards, and again, they're very popular players and popular times in their career, but really don't carry that much value. So you could very affordably get the 1963 Flair set, and probably, well, none of the most expensive cards would be like a Willie Mays that sells ungraded as for about $50. So all these players are Hall of Famers, except for two. We'll explain why their cards are valuable in this set a little later. So Joe Adcock and Steve Barber may not be familiar to the run-of-the-mill sports enthusiasts, but they did have value for another reason that we'll see. Now, after they produced this set and then no longer produced really until 1981, they branched out into football and basketball. So in 1960, they have the inaugural football set for Flair, which was players of the American Football League. So there are some well-known players that eventually transitioned or were well-known, like Sammy Baugh and Jack Kemp and George Blanda. And in 1961, their sets included both leagues. So it was the AFL and the NFL at that time. And in 1961, they also started their inaugural basketball set, which includes many of the popular players at the time. Certainly Bill Russell, Jerry West, and Wilt Chamberlain are well known. And even though Bill Russell's cards were already available in 1957, this was his first card in the Flair set and is today holds great value. And as many of you know, that unfortunately Bill Russell passed away just recently, and his cards are worth quite a bit, even the 1961 Flair. Then in 1986-87, this is, of course, is amidst of the card glut. So all the cards that were produced pretty much after 1973 are of less value because there were so many produced. But the Flair set of basketball became quite valuable because there were many cards that were produced at the first time of recognizable players, and they became their rookie cards. And one of the most well-known cards, and probably the most valuable card in the 1980s, is the 1987 Flair rookie card, which sells for certainly a variety of cost, but there has been recorded in sales and in auction of a 10 mint Flair card of Jordan selling for $33,000. So it's certainly a very popular card and valuable. In 1995, continuing along their sales of basketball cards, they bought Skybox Basketball, which is kind of an upgraded card and kind of impressive in terms of its coloring and gloss. They bought that. And in 1981, the Flair Company returned to the baseball market with their first set appearing again in 1981. And the reason they were able to is because the Topps monopoly lawsuit was broken. So people were able to get contracts with the players to be able to put on their cards, and it was no longer an issue. because Topps no longer had exclusive rights to sell baseball cards of specific players. And so these cards were, again, during the time of the glut, so comparatively to before 1973, they're not that valuable, but contain a lot of popular players. But in this set, as compared to the Topps set, probably the most unique card is the Harold Baines rookie card. With that. And it didn't even come in kind of prepackaged sets. It was basically people collected the cards and put them in boxes and kind of collected and designed their own sets. One of the unique things about Flair is they had the Danny Ainge baseball card back in 1980, and then in 1986 and 87, they also produced his basketball card. So he was a unique kind of dual sports player at the time. The Flair sets that basically became the most popular and still today hold value are what they call their update sets. So in 1984, we have two players that have really at least recognition, and that was Kirby Puckett and Roger Clemens. So if you wanted their first card really wasn't in the regular sets, it was in the update set of Flair. And so amongst the most valuable of a Clemens and a Puckett appears in the 1984 Flair. And they are now producing factory sets that become quite popular during this particular era, particularly the 1987 set, which was kind of pleasant on the eyes and included a lot of players that were well known in the field and their rookie cards. And one of the big sellers was the Barry Bonds rookie card at that time. And so the sets sold very well, and they were kind of higher price than the Topps product at the particular time. And then in 87 through 89, that Flair went on to produce kind of a upscale card, glossy card, and it was similar to the upscale Topps Tiffany sets that sold well. Then we have a whole kind of continuum of cards trying to outdo themselves and compete in the market and make the cards better quality, fancier, more gloss, et cetera, pictures clearer, action pictures and so forth. And so Flair kind of got into this market with what they called their Flair Ultra. And they also were able to kind of promote it because there was an awareness, certainly in the 90s, of that there were so many cards that they couldn't hold their value. But if you basically produce less, there would be less cards and they'd be more value. So they claimed that it was 15% of their regular production in the Ultra cards. So the Ultra cards had the UV coating and so forth, which is popular. And it had an update set, which the first cards for two popular players at the time and still fairly well known are Ivan Rodriguez and Juan Gonzalez. In 1994, again, kind of upping themselves, they developed Flair Ultra, which included an insert card. So in other words, a unique card that wasn't in high amounts and so forth in their sets. And then they even went on and developed the hot packs, and the cards were kind of unique in terms of having the two pictures in the front and a higher quality and inserts. We move on to, there are so many cards now and trying to enhance their sales and stimulate people to purchase that there'd be valuable cards, that there were lots of different inserts. And one of the popular inserts was the Pro Vision Gallery Flair in 1991, where they actually had kind of unique drawings of the players in different backgrounds. And they did this, and also 1994, where you have these 9-card sets, which are kind of have to collect lots of packs in order to get the whole set of 9 cards of what's available. Then they, again, continue to kind of upgrade their quality of cards, and they come out in 1993 with the Flair Super Premium cards that were very nice, had the dual pictures, the action photos, the high quality, the fancy boxes, and so forth that Flair made available. So there's so many sets out there in terms of even single companies producing several sets, and each set being unique in terms of its quality. But then along came 2007, and we have the end of Flair. Marvel, which remember, they had bought it in 1992, but they basically entered bankruptcy in 1996 and sold it to Upper Deck, and Upper Deck claimed bankruptcy in 2005, and who had acquired the trade name, and the last Flair branded baseball cards appeared in 2007, and so such as the end of Flair. But we have, the whole series of different sets, the Flair Ultra and so forth, continuing until that particular time. Now they continue to sell basketball and so forth, and football, but the baseball became history in terms of the competitive market. So one of the most valuable Flair baseball cards of the era, other than the updates, but the regular series, these are listed here with the Cal Ripken in 1982. And we have the Tony Gwynn, the Wade Boggs, and Ryan Sandberg rookie cards of 83. The expectation that the card would be valuable of Don Manling, rookie in 1984. We have the regular series rookie cards of Clemens and Puckett, but certainly not the value of the updates, which were the first cards. And then Canseco, who was purported to be the next great baseball player, and we won't go into his history yet, but that card was very popular as a rookie card at the time. Barry Bonds rookie card, that 1987 set, became a real item. And though it wasn't the most popular rookie card in 1989, it still was a high seller, despite the fact there were many made. But other competing companies like Ultra Deck, their cards were much more valued of people like Ken Griffey. So one of the kind of unique stories, and maybe one of the purchases that people made because it was unique, was the Billy Ripken iconic F-face era card in 1989. Now, what happened is that on the base of the bat, there was written in plain view on the knob, F face. I won't go what F stands for. You can use your imagination. You can actually read it there on the card as kind of putting it under a microscope. You see what it says. And that in the kind of smaller version of it, it looks like Rick instead of the actual word it is. So it's kind of embarrassing to the company, embarrassing probably to Billy Ripken that this appeared. And it was necessary for Flair to kind of correct this because cards were already available to people with this on it. So what Flair did is they tried to blur the writing with a black marker or a black box, or with whiteout or correction fluid, so that those, not only the original of the card in terms of what it actually said on the knob of the bat, but also the corrections became more valuable than you would expect a card of this sort to be, because it was just unique and it became a collector's item. And what Billy Ripken claimed that he did it to distinguish it as a batting practice bat and did not intend for use in the card. So it was a mistake on his part. He's embarrassed about a mistake on the Flair part, which they tried to correct. But in the history of cards, it became somewhat of unique and a conversation piece. Now, there are other cards within the Flair sets that are valuable, but not because of the player or the rookie-ness, but because of errors. And all cards in series have eras, and these are some of the unique errors that you see in the Flair set. So one of them is John Littlefield. Few people know of him, but it's unique in terms of getting the card because he was a right-handed pitcher, and yet there's a card that looks like he's a left-handed pitcher. So these were just where the photo was reversed and it becomes an error, and they corrected it. And then we'll go back to Joe Adcock. I mean, why is that card more valuable than other cards? Because for whatever reasons, it was distributed in short supply. So that there was a limitation of the number of cards, they call it short print, for Flair in 1963. And then you have, as I say, the Steve Barber. And what's unique about that, it was card number 1. So many times, especially in the early days of card collecting in the 50s and 60s and possibly even early 70s, is that kids would kind of have that card number 1 and stack them, and they would be the most handled, and it would suddenly put a rubber band around their packs and so forth, and it would make the card so the quality of the card was diminished. If you had a kind of a quality 7, 8, or 9, 10 graded Barber, it would be worth more because of this history. And then we have the card checkoff lists of the players. And normally these checkoff lists aren't that valuable, but they begin, if the older they are, to be valuable because if they're unmarked, so if no one checked off the players and it's still in good condition, that made it more valuable. So the 1963 checklist, even though they have a pitcher's player on it, became somewhat more valuable. Then we look at 1989, Randy Johnson, and certainly he's a great player and made the Hall of Fame. But what's unique about this card is that if you look in the background of the original print, you'll see the word Marlboro, and because collecting cards was a kids' activity, they didn't really want to be promoting cigarettes. So as you see in the corrected version, it's blacked out in the background of this card. And then, and so often, there you have printer mistakes or mistakes in terms of the names or statistics or something. So in the 1982, I'm sorry, Craig Nettles card, you'll see on the back that some of the cards in the original print, they spelled his name wrong, and then they corrected and spelled it correctly. So common errors, but nonetheless makes the card unique and shorter supply and more valuable in that sense. So that kind of gives you a little background, a little history of Flair, makes it interesting. Kind of in your collecting, you kind of try to collect these cards. They're not that expensive, but it's kind of fun and kind of unique that you have cards and you can tell the story of them. And like I say, the sets like the Legend set are fascinating because it's one of the few sets that basically produce pictures of the old players that's still affordable. The cards are affordable. And next time we'll go into another card company and kind of tell about the uniqueness and the value and the fun of collecting those cards. So I'll sign off and we'll talk to you later.